Hey, what's up, my loves? Welcome back to another episode of the It's Fucking Spiritual podcast. We are coming back at you today with a very spicy episode all about sex and love with one of the top sex and love coaches known as That Sex Chick on Instagram, Alexa Bowditch. I was rewatching this episode and I'm like, oh, I am excited to dive into this one. We recorded this a year ago, but still so relevant and so many beautiful nuggets of wisdom all about how to create safety in a relationship, how to communicate with your partner and build a relationship that really works for you. And we dive into a lot of different topics like BDSM, kink, polyamory, being the black sheep of your family. So if you've ever wanted to feel like a full-blown permission slip, this episode is for you. Something that I love about Alexa, she's just so open, so herself, so owns who she is and what she desires in life. And I truly think she's so permission giving for anybody that comes into her world. And I'm very excited to bring her wisdom to the show today. So without further ado, let's dive into the episode.
I didn't know that the self-pleasure, the masturbation, I didn't know that the thing that I was doing during bathtub time was actually a sin until I was ushered into Catholic school. And then it was, the consistent, you wait, but none of us did.
Yeah.
None of us did. So we're all going to hell. What do we do now?
Right. We're back, baby, with a brand new season of the It's Fucking Spiritual podcast. Join us each week as we have unfiltered conversations about how to transform your life. Our mission is to usher in a new era of spirituality where you don't have to be all love and light to live a life of alignment. Here, we honor all of it, the profound and the profane, the magic and the messy, and all things that make you human. So let's discuss the truth behind transformation and be unapologetic in our evolution. From manifestation to money, embodiment to energy, and all taboo topics, nothing is going to be off limits. Are you ready to live a life that feels just as good as it looks? Let's get fucking spiritual. Today's guest is going to be a spicy one. I am so excited for this interview today. We have one of the leading sex and love coaches in our generation here to talk to us on how she's on a mission to redefine sexual expression all across the globe. She is known as That Sex Chick on Instagram, and she's here with us today. Alexa Bowditch, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
I'm so excited to have you. And we were talking before this that nothing is off limits on this show, which I think a lot of our listeners love, is that we will go there.
Great.
And I love that you totally go there. So, give us a little bit of background, because obviously you're in this spicy industry. You talk about all of the different things. How did you come to now be a sex and love coach and doing what you're doing today?
Yeah. So, and like I mentioned before we started recording, my story is pretty colorful. It starts out with me living and growing up in South Louisiana, just outside of New Orleans. My family has been in the South Louisiana, New Orleans area for over 300 years. And so since before New Orleans was even named New Orleans, they were there. And I am probably the only one that will leave, will fly the nest. And right before I came here to record this podcast, I dropped my very southern Louisiana mother off at the airport.
Beautiful. What a contrast.
So she was here for a visit, and thank goodness, I've been doing this for over 6 years now, and she's officially come around.
Yeah.
But I mean, of course, when I first got started, it was like, could you please do anything other than this?
Yeah.
Because I grew up in this very small town Catholic environment. Expression at large was, you have to fit in a box, this particular Southern Belle kind of Southern Louisiana box. And it didn't work for me. And so definitely felt a little bit of the edgy black sheep kind of vibe, but I did try. I did try to do everything the way that faith and family and culture and upbringing told me I was supposed to do it, and it just didn't work. It was so incredibly stifling. So graduated from the University of Southern Mississippi, which is in Mississippi, so still very Southern. After high school, went to college. And then after college, I lived and worked on cruise ships for almost 6 years.
Okay.
So I traveled for almost 6 years. I've been to 79 countries on 19 different cruise lines, lots of contracts. And through my experience, I would say leaving small town and then going and seeing the world is maybe where personal development first happened to me, because I realized like the rest of the world loves and is and fucks and breathes and experiences the world very differently to this very small, kind of mindset that I was brought up in. And when I first got started on ships, I was engaged. And in that relationship, so I was 22 years old whenever I joined cruise ships and had to grow up and figure myself out. And that in that relationship, I learned all the things that I promised myself I would never allow to happen again in my life. And learned so much. And in so many ways, I'm probably going to be healing from that relationship maybe my whole life. And I'm so grateful. So it was one of those like really super messy, painful blessings. And I've had a handful that have really molded me into the person that I am. So it's this really interesting, like, that really sucked. And thank you.
Yeah.
And so stayed on ships for another couple years on my own. I was dating. I've seen lots of different types of people. I've seen lots of different types of penises and just bodies in general, and was just very curious, and felt like I could be curious because I was not home, because I was out in the world. And, I had a couple of different versions of rock bottom, after that relationship, because I was one of those people for a long time that lost myself completely in relationships. My identity was wrapped up in my relationship and my ability to please my partner, or be a good partner, or, if my body was or wasn't used in a particular way, then that was the determining factor of my worth and my value, and would completely lose myself in relationship. And when they would end, whether it was a good thing or not that it ended, I was deeply challenged by who am I? And so then really found my way into personal development, post, hitting some rock bottoms, rolling around in the gravel a little bit. And so when I found personal development, I made lots of big strides in health and fitness and nutrition and mindset. I was doing the yoga and the meditations and all the things that were like, wow, I'm awakening. Yeah. I am wow, there's so much more to life. I was getting this wrong, and started waking up, and then realized pretty early on that the things that I was learning in personal development and spiritual development were not directly translating into my sex life. They were not directly translating into intimacy containers with people that I had romantic interests with. It was like out here in the world, I'm looking good, I'm feeling good, mind's good, hands on my hips, shoulders back, like life is good. And then the guy that I would be interested in, or the chick that I'd be interested in, would walk into the room and my heart would skip a beat and I'd be 14 again.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how is this possible that I'm having a hard time leveraging the skills and the tools? And then eventually I started looking at sex as a means to develop. And because if I'm able to move through things over here, how I'm showing up in sex and intimacy, romantic dynamics, it's not translating. So if I look over here, what's possibly there for me? Where could I possibly be missing my areas for growth? So I started studying sex. And then, so like, that's the whole little backstory, weave it all together. Yeah. And so started studying open relationships and polyamory, which, I was introduced to Sex at Dawn, Christopher Ryan and Cachilda Jetha's book. It's a very anthropologically inclined book. So it's like not just a casual fun read, but I found it very interesting. Like, oh, people love in many different ways that I didn't understand. So you're saying that I'm choosing monogamy because the proverbial they, said that's what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. And so then questioning what's consensual non-monogamy, what's polyamory. And then the next person that I wound up dating kind of in my story wound up introducing me to BDSM. Okay. And kink and power dynamics. And so I just went on a journey. And it was a personal journey at first, of course, and then didn't know that I was going to wind up being a sex coach. Didn't know that this was going to be where my life took me. But eventually I started writing about my experiences because according to everyone back at home in South Louisiana, I was living a fairy tale life on cruise ships and it was always perfect. They didn't know how hard it was. They didn't know how hard the relationship was. They didn't know how hard the rock bottoms were. They didn't know my challenges with alcohol, my challenges with coping, with losing myself. They didn't know any of those things. So when I started to kind of come into my own and piece things together, I started writing my story. And so it was like people all of a sudden were like, I had no idea this was going on for you.
Yeah.
And then ensued community building. That was people I didn't know that just really resonated with the story. And then that led to podcasting and blogging and coaching and fast forward 6 years and
Beautiful.
And we have all kinds
now
of cool
here
stuff.
we are.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I love hearing everyone's journeys to how they end up sitting here in this chair, right? Because it really shows how we all like have such different paths and it's always forever evolving and becoming. It's like you can get into self-development through one door and then all of a sudden it leads you to something else and something else. So I love even the example of just hearing how you evolved over the years into it. And I'm so excited to dive into like open relationships, BDSM, kink. But before we do that, something that you've touched on in your story that I think is really resonant for people is this idea of I have to be a certain way, look a certain way, present in a certain way, have a certain type of love. And it can be really hard for people, especially those that have had a religious background or any religious shame or trauma or are just in society, like really put into a box. So what was the process for you, and maybe that you could share for somebody that's beginning to feel like, okay, I want more than what it is that I have right now. Or I feel like there's other things out there. Maybe they're listening to this podcast and they're like, I could never, right?
Yeah.
Or I wish. What was the process of beginning to accept yourself so fully that you allowed yourself to walk the path before maybe the acceptance from other people?
Yeah, I cannot tell you that I did it very gracefully. So I just did it.
Yeah.
I just did it. I got to a point where I couldn't take hiding anymore. And the pain and the discomfort of holding back, that was greater than the pain and the discomfort of coming forward. And so I didn't do it very gracefully. I think my family and my dear mother, who I just dropped off at the airport, who I love so much, and she's so awesome. I think that they were concerned that I was going to out everybody, that I was going to air dirty laundry, that I was going to talk about my story in a way that made them look bad. And here's the thing: if people are concerned with the way that you speak about them, then they should have treated you better, and they should have done better, and they didn't. Because they did the best that they could with what they have. And so the story is the story. And so, when I think about that time, I could have, and I did it the way that I did it, and everything's good now. So it was just really tense at first when I just decided I'm going to start talking about this stuff. I'm going to talk about it on my Facebook. I'm going to create a website and I'm going to blog about it. And I'm going to go on to podcasts and I'm going to just talk about what my life has been like. And it felt so freeing. And it also, I lost a lot of people.
Yeah.
I lost a lot of people. And even if that was for just a brief moment and they came back around, but I still lost them in an effort to find myself. And what's funny is that I felt lost and then I felt like I found myself by sharing it all and then realized that I had swung the pendulum so hard in the other direction that wasn't me either.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, whoa, okay. Then you got to bring it back towards the middle and assure everyone that loves me, I'm good. I'm calm now. I'm not angry at you for the things you didn't know that I was dealing with and all of that. So I'm also the baby of the family. My sister and I are 13 years apart. And so I had to have my dramatic moment. Very, very Leo, very just going to burn it all up in flames. And so when I get asked that question, I'm like, I can't tell you do it the way that I did it. But if you do it the way that I did it, it works.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
yeah.
And if I had a chance to do it over again, maybe and it wouldn't have happened this way regardless, but maybe I would have done it with a little bit more grace.
Yeah.
Not necessarily with the rocket fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Give myself permission to start speaking from a place of love and kindness and compassion instead of anger. I was an angry little girl trapped in a young woman's body that was trying to heal.
Yeah.
And so,
Oh, I acknowledge you for that and for the journey. And so many people are going to relate to that, myself included. I totally get with the swinging of the pendulum in the complete opposite direction. And sometimes that's the journey that we need to go on, and that's required. And what I'm hearing you even say is just like having the courage to have the awareness that you want to step into something new, and having the awareness and having the courage to follow that and trust, like it all worked out. Right?
Yeah.
It all ended up working out in the end. You drop your mom off at the airport this morning, and the bumps along the road are lessons, and that's okay. And you're not going to be able to see the future from this very moment of how it's going to unfold. And that's certainly the truth in my path as well. And just, I've found as I do this work and continue to walk the path, it's like I'm constantly recalibrating to a new version of me and who I'm becoming. And that's a part of it. And so the sooner you accept that on the path, at least I've found for me, that's been, yeah. But okay, so let's dive in. Let's start with open relationships.
Yeah.
So you grow up in this
conservative,
monogamous. It's the one way. Maybe like you can't have sex before. Did you grow up in any of those?
I mean, I went to Catholic school. I was going to church on Wednesdays and Sundays. So, I mean, I didn't know that the self-pleasure, the masturbation, like I didn't know that the thing that I was doing during bathtub time was actually a sin until I was ushered into Catholic school. And then it was, the consistent, you wait, but none of us did.
Yeah.
None of us did. So we were all going to hell. What do we do now?
Right. Yeah. So as you're going on this journey, well, actually, let's circle back to open relationships, but you probably had to deconstruct a lot of shame.
Yeah, I'm still doing it.
Yeah. So what does that look like? What does that process look like for somebody as they're...
Yeah, I mean, kind of on like the self-pleasure front, I think, and sex and all that. And I would love at some point, in our unfolding and telling of the story, I'm married now and in a mostly monogamous relationship, but I've experienced lots of different things.
Yeah.
And this has all been a conscious choice, which is very different than I'm doing the thing that I think I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
I'm intentionally choosing. And so I think of the times when, it's my husband and I, and we're sharing some kind of intimacy, and I have to coach myself. I realize, you're not breathing. You're breathing very shallowly. Mm-hmm. And then the little thing goes off in my head. I'm like, you're not making any sound. Well, you were just bearing down, closing your eyes, because I learned, a lot of people learned this, whether they grew up in a Catholic or Christian or religious environment or not, that pleasure has to be stifled and you have to hide it, and no one can hear it. You can't even let the energy go out to like clue anybody in that you might be doing that with yourself or with another person. And so get it done quick. Yeah. So breathe shallowly, breathe quickly, bear down, keep it localized. Don't experience the whole full range of what's possible in your body and in your spirit. And so, I have those moments where I'm like, haven't you learned this by now? And then it's like, no, Lex. Breathe. Okay, breathe. So that's like a very practical way that I see it come up in my life now. And it's really interesting because I grew up like Catholic-ish. Yeah. Like I had a chunk of time where I'm like, we're doing this. Yeah. Okay. And then a chunk of time where I'm like, wait, how come we're not doing this anymore? Like, why are we not at church right now? Like, I'm so confused. Is this right? Is this wrong? So I got a lot of mixed messages. And also my dear mother that I was just talking about, she's been married 5 times. So it's like full range of what are we supposed to do here?
Mixed
like
signals.
This is shameful and that's not, but this is. And so, I see these things like playing out in my own dynamics. And I've been speaking publicly about sex for a long time. Yeah. And I still see it coming up for me. Yeah. And so like the work is not done and healing's not linear and all those.
Yeah. Constant journey. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, so let's talk about your marriage and your dynamic, which sounds like monogamish.
Yeah.
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 So tell us a little bit about that dynamic and how you chose to consciously create that type of partnership and dynamic together.
Yeah, my husband Jordan and I got together. He found me in his mutual friends list on Facebook. Over 6 years ago, Facebook was still a pretty fun place to go to.
Yeah.
It's not really all that fun anymore, but it was then. And he added me as a friend and sent me a private message and basically asked if we could get to know each other. And I was living in New Orleans at the time, and he was living in San Diego, Encinitas, area. And we started our relationship, and I was this like exploring, dating, open, curious young woman. And here is this serial, monogamous, vanilla golden boy. And I'm just like this dark, moody, edgy, like the more like weird and, and so I don't know how, but God was like, you too, you do this, you know? And it didn't make very much sense at first. And when we met, I shared with him in the same conversation when he asked if I would date him. And he had come to visit me in New Orleans about 2 weeks after we exchanged our first message on Facebook. He flew to New Orleans to meet me to make sure it was real.
Wow.
And this was all led by him. I've never had a man do that for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's such a character. And so came to New Orleans, and in our drive to the airport to drop him off, he basically was asking me to date him. And I said, okay, but I want you to know what you're getting yourself into. I'm not sure monogamy's the way. And I don't know if it is or if it isn't. And then I said, dating me and getting into a relationship with me is committing to a sexual development journey. Like that's, and that. I know that it sounds like I was trying not to coach or anything, but I'm like, that's what it is. And to him, he's like, well, yeah, cool. Yeah, I can sign up. Yeah, we're gonna have threesomes, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, you're going to see. Like, you'll find out. That's not it. Like, it might be it. And also all of the things that you need to process in order to feel worthy of pleasure from two people at the same time. Because we're not going to do this as like, we're just drinking and partying and, whoa, look, we're having a threesome. It's like all intentional. What else is coming with this? And so that was, one of our first or a conversation that led us to dating. And it's just so funny now how things have progressed, because it took a really long time for him to come to terms with like, what does this actually mean?
Yeah.
And what do I have to process and go through? And we've been together a little over 5 years, married about 1.5 years. And we have intentionally chosen monogamous and open to playing with others for this season. As we are newly married and going to start our family, it feels good to have it be closed, to have it be our foundation and that we're working on our foundation. But, if it's like his birthday or he's had a big week where he's, whatever, I might have someone come in to deliver an experience with me for him. And that's where our comfort level is right now. And the thing that I appreciate about us, and that I would, how the previous question you asked where I'm like, don't take what I did and do it, maybe do it a little differently. Here's where I would say maybe do this the same. Yeah. Which is, don't get too attached to any of this being your identity. Your identity being poly, your identity being open, your identity being that you're practicing consensual. And, you can say, I practice consensual non-monogamy, which gives you space to go, and now I practice monogamy. Yeah. But I think people get so wrapped up in the identity of it. And they go, oh, I have this, like, oh, this is just a construct, and like love is love and free, and anyone can, and if I'm evolved enough, then I can have multiple partners. And if I'm evolved enough, I can manage all this and handle this. I think it's bullshit. Because it's another structure that you're putting yourself into. Like, it's another box. To us, from the beginning, it's been what feels good. Because we're exploring. Because, we're 34 and 35 now, but at the beginning, we were in our late 20s and going into our 30s. And it's like, we're still curious kids. Yeah. It doesn't have to be one way forever. And stuff's it's changing and dynamic all the time, just like you as a growing cyclical being. Like what your brand was, we were talking about this, what your brand was a year ago, 2 years ago is different. So why wouldn't you be that in your sexual expression or in your relationship, and just in general.
Yeah.
You know, so many people go, oh, it's going to be you and me just like this forever.
Right.
And they're bored.
Yeah.
You know, and so we give that wiggle room. And at the same time, a lot of our life is lived relatively conservatively.
Yeah.
So we have this open nature and also really are committed to the foundation of us and the sanctity and the covenant of our marriage, which is like, how could all these things be together? Well, because we chose it to be this way, intentionally so.
That is so inspiring and such an important conversation to have on both ends of the spectrum of like not defining yourself in putting yourself in one box. I think so many people like, and we've talked about this, and you know, I've kind of been in this world a little bit too in my own personal life. And I've definitely seen, talking about the swinging of the pendulum in the opposite direction. Now we're going to be open and free. And if I just do more work on myself, then I can, you know, develop further so that I cannot be bothered by certain, it's like, I love the permission that you give through that conversation to people to allow yourself to explore and to define it in different seasons. And it doesn't have to look a specific way. And it gets to be a walking paradox in many ways than what people believe. So thank you for bringing that up. And I definitely see that in this space as well. So I think it's a really important conversation. And to anybody listening to this right now who maybe like wants to explore an open relationship, or they want to redefine what their current partnership looks like, how would you tell someone to go about beginning to explore this? And especially for someone who, I know you mentioned when you met Jordan, he was like, you know, the monogamous, more golden boy, and you were kind of this darker, edgy. I think a lot of the listeners might have a dynamic like that. I've gotten questions even personally. So how would you tell someone to go about beginning to, you know, either restructure their relationship, bring it up, and how do you create safety in that conversation and approach it with love and compassion?
Yeah, you're probably going to fuck it up.
Yeah.
So just like be okay with that. Just probably, like maybe not. Maybe there's a small percentage and like fuck it up. Like what does that really mean? You know? Because if a difficult conversation winds up turning into a breakdown and a breakthrough, you know, then did you really fuck it up?
Yeah.
So it isn't easy. For a lot of people, this conversation isn't easy. But my main thing is to move slowly. You know, I think a lot of people get inspired and get excited, and then versus, you know, they take manic action on it versus an inspired action, which is like they just go, let's get on field. You know, let's get on the app. Let's start swiping. Let's see how this goes. And then all of a sudden one person realizes in the dynamic that they thought that they were okay with it. And now all of a sudden they're not okay, but they don't want to take it back because what does that mean about them? So go slow. If you haven't restructured or considered your relationship dynamics and like what your agreements are and what you're okay with, like first and foremost, you have to get clear with yourself. What are you curious about? What kinds of experiences do you desire? Are you looking to expand in your capacity to love? Would you like to love more than one person? Or would you just like to have more varied, adventurous sexual experiences? And are you going at that decision based off of feeling like your relationship is lacking? So when people are like, you know, we're not having sex, so maybe we should see other people. Like maybe we should get sex from other people, but we stay together. So there's something that's not quite right in their dynamic. That there's something that needs to be healed and all that in their own dynamic. So before you start bringing other people into the mix, like you got to go back to your foundation. So for me, it's people who are going at this from a place of love and curiosity, and both parties are on board. So if you can only go as fast as the person with the slowest nervous system. So if one person's triggered, you slow down. Yeah. You simply slow down. Otherwise, it's not safe. You are not going to push someone who's triggered and scared into being not triggered and not scared, no matter how much you rationalize with them, because this is based off of emotions, and emotions are inherently irrational. Yeah. So it's impossible. And for people who are triggered or flooded, where they're just like, I'm really overwhelmed with this conversation, giving them more information is not going to help them. slowing things down and soothing them and showing them that you are not going anywhere and that this is just a conversation and we don't ever have to talk about it again, and I love you. And creating that space and that safety. And so it's potentially going to be lots and lots and lots of those conversations. So if you're going to crack open the conversation of opening your relationship in any form, be prepared to have conversations ad nauseum about the subject. And it might seem like you go one step forward and 25 and a half steps back. You're not. Every conversation you have is moving forward. You got to have great communication skills, sure. And I'm at this point now where I've worked with enough people where I think sometimes we talk about stuff too much. Like we overprocess.
Yeah.
And overprocess to the point where we're not actually sure how we'll be in a certain situation. We're just in theory land.
Yeah. What if?
Getting triggered and upset about theories. So there's also an element of you can talk up to a certain point and then you get to do. And then when you do, whatever the do is, it could be just messaging a person online. It could be flirting with someone at a restaurant or at an event or something, kind of going up against that edge. It's from there, then you have feedback. And then you can bring that into your next conversation. So at some point, just kind of stop talking about it and go try something. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be, we're all in bed naked together with a stranger. It's what if a sexual experience with multiple people is a 10, what's 1 or 2? Yeah. And just play around there for a little while, and give yourself new material to talk about. And then, okay, well, how would we do this maybe differently? And then kind of going up against that edge again.
Oh, that is such good advice. And I'm just loving every single thing that you're saying right now. Briefly interrupting this episode to share with you my new group program called Expand. If you are someone who has listened to the podcasts, you've read the books, you've tried all of the things that they say to do, like mirror affirmations, journaling, hypnosis, you've done it all, and you consider yourself a very self-aware person, and then you keep wondering, why am I still stuck in the same patterns? If you resonate with this, I promise there is an answer. I felt very similarly to you until I found nervous system regulation and somatic embodiment work. So the thing is, no amount of subconscious reprogramming, journaling, or affirmations is going to outprogram a dysregulated nervous system. And until your body actually feels safe to hold the thing that you are calling in, you'll stay stuck on a loop, feeling like you are taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And I know that there is more out there for you. So if that resonates with you, I invite you to join my 7-week group program where I'm going to take you through the nervous system regulation tools and techniques, the way to somatically process and release emotions stuck in your body that are keeping you stuck. You'll be held in a group container that's intimate and that you can actually apply these tools in real time and integrate them into your life. So we are actively enrolling in that now. We start on March 20th. So if this is calling you, definitely go check out the show notes below and come join us. It's so good. And I want to talk about the element of safety too, because I know that that's a really, really big component. And you touched on it a little bit of I love what you said about you can only go as fast as the slowest person's nervous system, which is so true. So if someone is listening to this and they're like, I'm going to bring up the conversation, but typically I don't bring up conversations, right? Or, I know I might fuck it up, but what are things that someone can do that will help create as much safety as possible?
For themselves or for a conversation to happen? Or they want to bring this up?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So safety, it's a really interesting thing, right? So safety is an experience that I can I can bring myself into safety and to feeling safe. So that can be, I'm very present with my body. I'm able to get myself out of my head and experiencing the sensations and the things that I'm feeling inside of my body, sensation before labeling emotions and all of that. And so this is trauma and somatics kind of stuff. And embodiment practices and things. And so safety is something that I can cultivate in my body before I go into sexual experiences, big conversations, family dynamics, etc. And I can consistently bring myself back into you are safe, you're safe to feel, you're safe to be, you're safe to express, your sexuality is safe, your expression is safe, you are safe, you're safe in your body. And it's things that, it's mantras that you can say to yourself, it's big, deep breathing that you can do, it's presence. Kind of in a nutshell, it's bringing yourself into the present moment and landing yourself back into your body. So you can do an exercise like that with yourself, and we call it the creating safety exercise. Yeah. And in my world,
straightforward.
Yeah. And I mean, I teach this to I work with a lot of women, and they have a challenge at times in opening up and surrendering into dynamics with typically their male partners. I work with a lot of kind of alpha, edgy, big personalities. I wonder why. Yeah. And, entrepreneurial-esque, or maybe even stay-at-home moms, or like they run their families. Like they run a lot of masculine energy. And the thought of surrendering to someone else and being out of control is absolutely fucking terrifying. Yeah. Which is so wild, right? They want to be with their person and they love their person, but the thought of surrendering to them is like, no, that's not safe. So the first thing that we do is cultivating safety in the body, which is big, deep breathing. So it's learning your breathing exercises and saying the mantras. Yeah. So I'll have them do that before they go into bigger conversations where they're either talking about, hey, I'm interested in opening our relationship, or I'm interested in, tying you to the bed. Yeah. Or, going to a sex club, or, insert whatever edgy thing that they've never asked for before. So that's one piece. And the next piece, when it comes to conversations in general, I think one of the most disarming things that a person can do, for me, certainly this works just about 100% of the time, is that I talk about what I'm afraid of. That's the vulnerable piece. I have something that's been on my mind and on my heart for a while, and I would really like to share it with you. What has stopped me so far is feeling like when I share this deeply personal thing and this vulnerable thing with you, that you might reject me, that you might not love me, that you might hear it and take it personally, that you might fear me, that you might not want to be with me anymore or do these things with me, or that you'll judge me, that our relationship will change. And you share what's real, because you can't, like when you say those things out loud, usually what winds up happening is the other person starts to soften and they realize, oh, this is a big deal. This isn't just in a casual, like, I'd like to try, whatever. I want to paint the room blue. Like, it's not that. It's something sincere. Then the other person can register that they need to hold space. Yeah. Right? And I'd like for you to listen. Are you open to listening? And not questioning just yet, but just listen, so that you're not in a back and forth, and it's not whether someone's point is right or wrong, but then the person who's sharing needs to and commit to sharing from their personal experience based off of their emotions, not examples, and not, I do this, you do that. Or like it needs to look in a certain kind of way, but emotions and what they're experiencing. And it's hard to argue with that. Can't argue with someone else's emotions, but they belong to them. Yeah. So that's my tips on how to have hard conversations. So good. Yeah. And then towards the end, you can always reflect and ask the person, at the end, I would love to hear when I'm done fully sharing all the things. Like, first, are you down to listen? Yes. Okay, when I'm done sharing, then I would love to hear what questions you might have, So, and I don't like to give such rigid, you got to follow this step, then this step, then this step when it comes to hard conversations. But basically, vulnerability and sharing your fears and creating a space and time. Because if you try to have a hard conversation and there's a baby gonna wake up from a nap any moment, or they're mid washing the dishes, or people are coming in and out of the house, and you're just in passing, you're like, hey, drop a bomb. Yeah. There has to be the correct set and setting. And so you get the commitment, because otherwise they could be processing all of the things, all of their peripheral stuff, and it would be difficult for them to be able to actually listen to you.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. And especially the piece on naming your fear. Like it just totally disarms and creates that connection. And I think that's such a good piece. If you take anything from that piece, like naming your fears is just so transformational in the ability to be able to connect with someone else in your own vulnerability and be seen.
Yeah.
So I love that. This is all so good. And so someone, let's say they've had the conversation, they're ready to be open, they're ready to walk the path, right? I know you've mentioned BDSM and those dynamics. They want to try some kink. You know, they're ready to explore outside of just vanilla sex. So can you give us, even for the listeners listening that maybe they're like, what is that? Like, give us a little bit of context on what that could look like, and then how someone could begin to bring that
explore
into the bedroom.
that road.
Yeah.
Because they're not mutually exclusive.
Right.
People who are open and playing with others are not necessarily kinky.
Yeah.
They could be kinky, and people who are in who play in the kink space or BDSM space aren't necessarily open or playing with others.
Yeah, touch on that a little bit, because I think a lot of people have the misconception that, you know, if you're into one, you're into the other and all of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've met lots of people who have multiple partners in various dynamics that work for them in the season that they're in, that they're at in life.
Yeah.
I always like to give that caveat. They might not be that way all the time, but right now this is what works for them.
Yeah.
And so I've met plenty of people that are, when I mention BDSM or I mention kink, and they have multiple partners, they don't play in that regard. You know, It's more about the relationship dynamics, about the kind of love and lifestyle that they get to live. Maybe it's more about the resources that they get to pull between their partners and how they get to live their life. Like, there's so many reasons why people might choose to have alternative relationship dynamics.
Yeah.
And then some people choose to have multiple relationship dynamics because they have very particular kinks. And they have maybe a primary partner that is relatively vanilla, but then they have their rigger partner that they go and play and do shibari. And maybe the person is a rope bunny, so they're a rope bottom and they get tied. And then they have a partner that does the tying, or maybe they have a partner that's a daddy. And so, you know, their regular partner is, you know, their regular partner that they make life with. And then they go to this person, and this person takes care of them kind of from afar and make sure that they, you know, are eating well and they're taking their medicine and they're, you know, just they're feeling really good and really sweet, and that they've got, you know, a nice toy every so often. And so that's that kind of daddy little dynamic. And so there's so many flavors of this, and like people who are listening are like, what the fuck is she talking about? Like there's so many flavors. And so I might throw something out there and you're just like, that is not for me. It's totally fine. We're not yucking anybody's yum here, right? Your kink might not be my kink. Though I promise you have a flavor.
Yeah.
Or two, or a few that is just waiting inside, you know? And the rise and the explosion of like erotic novels, and the erotic novels being turned into these kind of cheesy movies and all of that is just, yeah, and especially women. So I'm speaking to women. There's a lot more to the erotic creature of a woman than most women will let themselves express in a lifetime.
Yeah.
So much more. And I think a lot of women are bored today, and not letting themselves, you know, connect with pleasure and connect with desire and connect with eros and heal their sexuality and connection to their bodies and all these things. And so that could be a topic for another day. But yeah, when it comes to like going down the kink path, then there's lots of people that I've experienced that are in very committed monogamous kinky relationships. Like I have a couple that's been on my podcast that we're connected with online that is in a 24/7 DS dynamic, and they're married.
Yeah.
They don't play with others, and 24/7 DS. So just to give a little bit of the education here, BDSM is a 4-letter acronym that stands for 6 words: bondage, dominance, discipline, sadism, submission, and masochism. A lot of times people in the DS community, in the BDSM community or DS community, I'll kind of just describe why we would say one or the other. There's been a bit of a shift away from using the term BDSM because of the sadomasochism piece, because people can leverage sadomasochism in unhealthy ways, and they're in and they have been deemed psychological disorders. So that's not the people who are playing consensually. Those are people who are acting out kind of, in a way that is potentially unhealthy. So when I first got started exploring this, I was like, what the hell is all of this? Deranged, depraved people who are just traumatizing themselves or re-traumatizing themselves, fucking themselves up. Like, what is this?
Yeah. I think people think that too, of like, I've definitely heard in that space of, oh, you're just replaying, these are all traumatized, and you're just replaying your trauma. So what would you say there is like the difference between maybe someone who's doing this in an unhealthy way versus someone who is like wanting to openly explore a deeper dynamic?
Yeah. And so then you see the people shifting away from, like that BDSM kind of acronym and going more towards DS, which is the undercurrent energetics that are at play in all of the varying dynamics, which is dominant and submissive. And in our world, since and I say our world, I'm talking about, our company, we very much are a bridge when people are like, they're just starting to be okay with opening up to like what's possible and new. So we will use the terms leader follower a lot because it's a little bit more digestible.
Yeah.
But I like a good dom sub reference. Someone's leading and someone's following. And so who is going to be the leader and who's going to follow? Someone's leading a journey. So we have the dominant who's leading the submissive on a journey that the submissive has consented to and the dominant has consented to give, and vice versa. And so that's the difference. There's consent, there's communication, there's free will, there's agency, all of that. That's the difference between people who are potentially acting out in compulsive ways that is damaging to their physical body and their emotional body and psyche. And so we're not talking about that.
Yeah.
We're talking about the fun stuff.
Yeah, the fun stuff. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, I love this. And what I've found in my own personal journey of exploration, and we talk about divine masculine, divine feminine all the time.
We use that term those terms as well instead of dom sub as well.
And so that's what I was going to say is that in a healthy dynamic, in a healthy DS dynamic, I've found that in many ways it's actually the divine masculine, divine feminine presenting. And I think a lot of women, actually, that you mentioned earlier, you worked with a lot of women who are masculine in their everyday and they are running the show. Maybe they're online CEOs in some way, or they're running their household or whatever. And I've personally found too that a lot of these women, and maybe you can speak to this, like love the dynamic of actually getting to be able to be submissive in this setting. And I also find too that people that are kind of walking into this work, and I'd be curious to hear what you say about it, is like, oh, I don't want to give up all my control. That's not safe, right? But when you actually find, like, I found that the submission or the person that's in the submissive role is the one that actually holds the power because they're giving that away. So what can you say to like that dynamic and kind of clear up what it actually looks like inside of a DS dynamic?
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? I what is today? Today's Tuesday. So yesterday I was on a call with a bunch of couples, and Jordan, my husband, and I we led a kinky meditation and a fantasy little thing for our couples. And then we taught on spanking. So the previous call, this is something that we do throughout the year. We do our couples calls. And the previous time we were doing the energetics of dominance and submission just so that they could feel it. It's like, oh, well, I want to play in this kinky way. And so, let's do some edgy things. And so I guess we start by going to a sex shop, and I guess I get this flogger thing, right? You want to be whacked? Like, you think this is sexy? All right, cool. I'm going to whack you with this, like these tiny strips of leather.
Yeah.
And then you get into the dynamic, you get into the room and everything's kind of awkward and like a little bit the same as normal, except you've got this piece of braided leather in your hands, and then you're like, bend over and I'm gonna whack you, and then you just like with a big question mark, you're like, whack, and nothing is sexy about it. Nothing was really all that intentional. It's just in an effort to do something different. It's not about the toy. It's not about the spanking. It's not about the pinwheel. It's not about the blindfold. It's not about any of the tools or the accoutrement. It's about the energy that is required in order for those things to evoke eros,
Yeah.
The energy that is required for those things to be hot.
Yeah.
So, and that comes with authenticity and someone being very, very, very attuned, very congruent, and very present. And attunement and congruence, a lot of people, I think, they understand what present is, but congruent and attunement are huge. And this is really what's present in DS dynamics that are really special, healthy, and really hot. And so it's that the dominant is so attuned to the submissive that they're paying attention to every single thing that the submissive does. If the submissive's breathing goes a little bit shallow, if the breathing goes in and nice and deep and is relaxed, they're paying attention to the winces and the maxillary, like little micro features of their face when they look uncomfortable, when they really respond to something, and they're paying so attention, they're so attentive and attuned to the energy even shifting that it's based off of that they choose what we're doing next. Mm. And that deep presence. So they're not sitting here going, okay, well, I wrote on a piece of paper what our scene, the scenario is going to be. So I wrote, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. And it's like in my notes in my mind. And I'm detached from the experience. No, I'm present. I know what my submissive wants. I know where their limits are. I know what we've agreed to. And now I'm going to pay so much fucking attention, and I'm going to have so much presence on that person that we're going to go on a ride.
Yeah.
And most people have never had that much focused presence on them. It's incredibly erotic to have someone focus solely on you. And it's also incredibly vulnerable. So people have a lot of healing, experience a lot of healing in DS dynamics because they're being paid attention to in a way that they've never been before in their lives. And it's very vulnerable. And a lot of times people have cathartic releases, and they'll shake and they'll cry and they'll moan and they'll orgasm and they'll do all these things. And then afterwards realize that they've got a sense of peace inside of them that they've never experienced before. So it's about much, much more than I'm going to hurt you or were you a bad girl today? Get the fuck out of here. Like, that's not what we're doing here. And so many people from the outside looking in have no idea that it's about so much more than, just getting their rocks off and hurting each other.
Yeah.
There's so much kindness, care, and consideration. And I watched people a couple weeks ago cry, on the call because they had no idea that was what we were talking about this whole time. And like, I know you're changed forever once you understand the benefits and the healing potential between, the dominance and submission energetics. And I think the last thing that I want to share on that is that I didn't mention the congruent part. So both parties, and this is big with relationships in general, and this would be a challenge to everyone, is to see how deeply congruent you can be in your life in general. And what that means is the words that are coming out of your mouth match. The energy that is coming off of your body matches the contents of your heart. All those things line up. When they don't line up and you're saying the right things, but I don't know if you've ever been in an experience where all the words are right, but everything feels wrong and your body is screaming, run, unsafe. This is so incredibly important. Check yourself when the words that are coming out of your mouth do not match the contents of your heart and the energy that you're pouring out. And this is important for both dom and sub. And so those women that are having a hard time when they're just like, yeah, let's just do it. It's not congruent. That's not safe. So you're asking someone to come in and to be dominant in your world, but you're not actually safe for them to do it.
Yeah.
So they, these women, these alpha, edgy boss, they're suited up to the nth degree with all their weapons of how they've got to protect themselves and keep on schedule and make the money and keep the kids alive and do all the things. And their partner is like, I just want to love you. And they've just got all these weapons. And so there essentially could potentially be some congruent issues there where they're like, yeah, I want it, but it's up to you to put the weapons down. If you resonate with this story, it's up to you to put the weapons down so that you can be a safe place for your partner to show up and do the thing that you say that you want and not the other way around. It's not when my partner shows up and is big enough or is bigger than me, then I'll feel safe. You create the safety in your body first. And submissive and passive are not the same things.
Yeah.
So throw that out there too, is that submissive doesn't mean I'm so tired, I've been doing stuff all day, I'm just going to lay here, do whatever you want. That's not submissive. And that's also not fun to fuck. So just get that in your head as well.
Yeah. Oh, so many good nuggets of like wisdom, so many takeaways, Alexa, from this conversation. I know people are listening to this right now like, oh, I'm so excited. I'm so ready. Maybe I'm so triggered by this conversation in a great way, right? I love just how you push the edges of all of it. And everything that you said, I love. I so agree with in my own personal journey too. So I love that you're bringing this to people and to the world. And to wrap up our conversation today, what is just one thing for people that are listening to this right now that just might be on your heart? What's one thing that you can share with them when it comes to their sexual exploration or their relationship?
Yeah. I love this question, and it's the same every time. It's take responsibility.
Yeah. Take
radical ownership of where you're at in your relationship and in your life, or whether you're in a relationship or not. Take responsibility. Like the choosing to be a victim, and this is not, people have had shitty things happen to them. So I won't discredit that or discount that. And you can still choose to live your life as a victim to your circumstances, creating dynamics where you are consistently the martyr in your world, and life is never happening for you, especially when it comes to romance, especially when it comes to sex and intimacy. And so the way that you shift out of that and to actually become more empowered is to take ownership where you're at right now and take responsibility. So when I say that, that's, if you take stock of your life and your intimacy, your romance, all of that, and it's not what you want it to be, or it's not what you desire it to be, or you know that it could be better, or that you want more, that is a decision that you get to make. It's not your partner's fault or your lack of partner's fault. It's something you can directly influence. And and this is also a little bit edgy, but I think for a lot of people in relationships, I'm just going to go for it. I think that a lot of challenged relationships can be remedied and healed through the woman. Not that it's her fault, that it's maybe not quite right, but she can change it.
Yeah.
She can change it. And that's not to excuse him from anything that if it's a heteronormative relationship, it's not to excuse him from anything that he's not doing or not providing, or the shortcomings or the challenges or whatever. But I really believe that the woman's body holds the power and holds the magic and can transform a relationship from within her out. So take responsibility for that. And, whatever the next right step is, maybe that's just continuing to listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
Maybe that's reading a book. Maybe that's going to a workshop. Maybe that's bringing these conversations up with girlfriends or with people that you can confide in. And then eventually see where that leads you. But just take ownership and then decide what's your next step.
Oh, so good. So good. That's a whole other podcast. We're going to have you back to talk about that. Thank you so much for joining us today, for all of your wisdom, for the way that you show up in the world. And where can everybody find you?
Yeah, that's Sex Chick on Instagram. And Sex and Love Co. is the company that my husband and I run. So I primarily work with women and couples, and my husband primarily works with men and couples. We work with the couples together. And so sexandlove.co, which is,
Beautiful.
A great spot. We've got amazing free resources. But, Instagram's where I typically hang out the most.
Yeah.
So just find me there and connect with me there. And then, we can see if our love affair leads us somewhere else.
I love it. Well, we will put all of that in the show notes so that you can find us. And again, thank you so much, Alexa, for coming on. You guys, if you loved this episode, definitely share it. Tag both Alexa and I. Follow her on all of the platforms, all of the things. And as always, I love you, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to the It's Fucking Spiritual podcast. I am so glad that you're here. And if this episode resonated with you, I invite you to share this with a friend that you feel needs to hear it. And if you are really feeling the love and support for this show, this podcast thrives off of your listens and your reviews. So I would love if you could leave us an honest review. We would love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your questions, and it helps us get this podcast in the hands of more people and would mean so much to me to receive your support. So thank you.